In the kingdom of Gransreich, inside the royal palace there exists a long-standing custom, which is to hire a royal tutor to educate the princes in preparation for the throne. Those chosen to be tutors are all elites, brilliant talents sought throughout the entire kingdom. The tutor entrusted by the king is named Hain. The king has 6 children, including 1 princess and 5 princes. Although it has been decided that the successor to the throne will be the eldest son, unforeseen misfortunes could occur in the future, and so the king wants Hain to tutor the younger siblings, to develop them and prepare them to be ready to inherit should anything happen. The carriage carrying the royal tutor arrived at the capital. Hain stepped down full of presence and pride. It seemed the king had chosen someone trustworthy, but the 2 gate guards did not quite believe it because of his height. Even though Hain tried to introduce himself, they still thought he was the son of the royal tutor. Fortunately, the queen appeared, otherwise who knew how long the 2 young men would have kept patting his head. After that, she briefly introduced Hain to the princes. She could not understand why the previous tutors gave up so soon, even though she saw the princes as obedient. Regardless, whether they were obedient or troublesome, Hain was determined to complete this duty. Then she led him to the prince's chamber. When the door opened, he stepped inside and introduced himself to them. The princes appeared before him perfectly, as if stepping out of a painting. One of them extended his hand in welcome and spoke very politely, but that politeness lasted only 2 sentences. That prince immediately changed his attitude, speaking arrogantly, condescendingly, and not acknowledging Hain at all. His name was Leonhard, the 4th prince of the kingdom. Handsome on the outside, but once he opened his mouth, he was filled with arrogance and a pride as high as Mount Everest. Hain gave him the nickname Arrogant Everest Prince. While that one was talking, another prince suddenly rushed over, picked Hain up and played around. This one's name was Licht, the 5th prince. Hain never thought a member of the royal family could be so playful, so he called him the Playboy Prince. Seeing this, the 3rd prince came over to correct his younger brother and apologize to the tutor. His name was Bruno. He asked about Hain's education and background, but upon receiving the answer that Hain had never gone through any formal schooling, he immediately changed to a cold attitude. A knowledgeable prince. The last one was introduced by him, named Kai, the 2nd prince, who seemed quite frightening as he greeted Hain with a glare, then silently walked away without a word. Well, at least the introductions were done. Hain immediately moved to the main issue. He wanted to interview the princes. Interviewing each one would help him grasp their knowledge so he could arrange lessons. But the 4th prince immediately opposed this fiercely, because he hated tutors, claiming that Hain would be just like the former ones who would soon quit. Bruno also agreed, because he believed a tutor with no formal schooling could not possibly teach him. Licht followed the majority, while Kai did not express an opinion. Now Hain also understood why the previous tutors quit so early. The princes insulted them before discarding them. But so what? He did not care. What Hain wanted to know was who would be interviewed first. He had been entrusted with the responsibility of teaching them, so quitting midway was not an option. The 4th prince still would not give in, intending to persuade his brothers to convince the king to dismiss Hain, but was doused with cold water by Licht, who was the first to accept the interview. Bruno also did not want to argue, but he wanted to see what kind of tutor their father had specially invited. After that, Prince Kai also came close to Hain, mumbling words that were unclear but seemed like he was telling Hain to get lost, then quietly walked away. The 3 of them all left, leaving only Leonhard with Hain. In the end, Hain dragged him back to his room and interviewed him right there. The 4th prince, Leonhard, 15 years old, the most handsome young man on the continent with the nickname Lily of Gransreich. His character was described in documents Hain had found as humble and kind, but the reality was that he was an arrogant Everest prince. The purpose of this interview was both to learn more about his personality and to evaluate his learning ability, but the difficulty lay in how to get him to take the test. When Hain asked Leonhard why he hated teachers, the boy simply said he hated them just like carrots and bell peppers, suddenly dragging teachers into the category of food. After a round of questioning, Hain finally discovered part of the reason. No tutor had ever truly paid attention to him. Up until now, they had only cared about the king's mood, and most importantly, he hated studying while tutors forced him to study, so tutors were like enemies. Therefore, the only thing he had learned from tutors was running, sometimes running on foot, sometimes on horseback. Thanks to countless escapes, he had won many trophies, especially in athletics. With this situation, Hayne wondered if giving him a test would only make him run. And exactly as predicted, as soon as Hayne held up the test questions, Leonhard pulled up his trousers and ran. But what was more surprising was that Hayne could keep up with his speed. Although the main door was blocked, there was still the window. Leonhard tried to escape through it, but accidentally dropped his diary. Hayne quickly picked it up and crawled under a bench to read it. After reading a few lines, Hayne realized the diary was completely negative. Even trivial matters caused Leonhard to collapse into despair and disappointment. When Hayne crawled out and asked him about it, Leonhard denied it, claiming it was Licht's diary, so Hayne returned it to him. At that moment, Leonhard finally admitted it was his. With this weakness in hand, Hayne immediately used it to force him to take the test. In the end, Leonhard reluctantly but seriously completed it and filled in all the answers. After receiving the results, Hayne told Leonhard to meet him at 4 p.m. for their first lesson, then left the room. Leonhard was still sulking, thinking of how to ask his father to dismiss Hayne, when suddenly he heard the sound of the door opening. He thought Hayne had returned to beg him to attend at 4, but it turned out to be a maid bringing pastries. It was Hayne who had arranged to have them delivered as a reward for him. So Leonhard gave up telling the king, but still had not accepted this tutor. Now it was the next prince's turn, the wise Prince Bruno. The third prince, Bruno, 16 years old, had since childhood been praised as a prodigy with extraordinary knowledge. He was able to lecture in many fields and was considered a promising young scholar. These were the details Hayne had gathered. Entering his room, Hayne was a little surprised to see it filled with many kinds of books. But the important matter was how to get him to take the test. Unexpectedly, as soon as Hayne presented it, Bruno accepted and completed it immediately in just an instant. Not only that, but he also wanted to test Hayne's own knowledge and ability. Until now, every tutor had been inferior to Bruno. If Hayne could not prove himself, then he would be dismissed. Hayne thought carefully. Accepting the challenge was not a good idea, but suddenly Bruno commented that he never expected a royal tutor to be so small. Every time Hayne heard the word small, he felt offended. He accepted the test right away. The first challenge Bruno proposed was a game of chess. From a chess match, one could see many things about an opponent. Bruno, with his 100% win rate, was extremely confident. But with just a few simple moves, Hayne checkmated him. Bruno was left dumbfounded, unable to believe it. He continued with mental arithmetic. Again he lost. Switching to music, Hayne could replace an entire orchestra. In cards, he lost miserably again. Bruno became shaken and could hardly believe it. Finally, he pulled out what he was most confident in: knowledge. 100 difficult questions from many different fields, written randomly in 5 languages. But before he could finish explaining, Hayne had already handed in the answers, even correcting spelling mistakes. The result drove Bruno to despair. Since childhood, he had buried himself in study to stand out, and now he was defeated by a genius, leaving him confused. At that moment, Hayne noticed Bruno's research paper and asked to read it. After going through it, he acknowledged it and even gave advice to improve it. Seeing his hard work understood and recognized, even receiving constructive suggestions, Bruno became excited, collapsed to the ground, and called Hayne master with eyes full of admiration. From now on, Hayne is the person he respects most. It turned out Bruno's desire to test him was simply to find someone better who could teach him what he didn't know. But the whole thing about calling him master felt a bit strange. Hayne refused, but Bruno stubbornly insisted on calling him that. Luckily at that moment Licht burst in, asking if Hayne had finished the interviews, and then practically carried him off. If Licht hadn't shown up, Hayne wouldn't have known how to escape. That finished 2 of them. Next was Prince Licht. According to investigative information, Licht is the 5th prince, 14 years old, a handsome young man with a cheerful personality, very close to nobles from other countries. He often sneaks into town and stands out among the populace, especially women. He could be called extremely extroverted. Finally, they arrived at his room. Hayne seemed a little stunned by being carried upside down like that. Licht opened the door and introduced Hayne to everyone. Turns out they were his girlfriends, but being mistaken for a child isn't always a bad thing. When Licht said there was a small royal tutor, these girls were very eager to meet Hayne, but only for a moment because Hayne still had to interview Licht. Though a bit reluctant, they left to give the two of them some privacy. After all, it wasn't just Hein. Licht also had personal things to ask. Hein thought it would be about studies or his background, but what Licht was curious about was Hein's body parts. Being that curious and only getting slapped once in the face was fortunate. After that, Hein gave him the test, but Licht wouldn't concentrate and kept chattering nonsense. Hein reminded him to focus seriously, but Licht had already finished long ago. Then, just as Hein was about to go interview the last prince, Licht called him back to ask a question. If it had been the same sort of question as before, Hein would have refused. But Licht's question was, who is Hein, really? Other tutors were famous with grand titles, but Hein alone was extremely mysterious in terms of information. At that moment, Licht's gaze became incredibly sharp and penetrating, but the next second he returned to his usual playful demeanor. Licht's girlfriends poked their heads in to ask if the interview was finished. Seeing the two of them looking tense, they were told they were only discussing serious matters, so there was nothing to worry about. Hein arranged to meet Licht in the Great Hall at 4 p.m., then left. After Hein had gone a short distance, Licht opened the door again to watch, and Hein became wary he had been complacent with him. 3 princes were done. Now only the second prince, Kai, remained. 17 years old, a quiet person who rarely appears in crowds. After a period of fighting at the military academy, he was suspended, a figure known for a fierce temper. After knocking on the door for a while with no answer, Hein asked a passing maid and learned the prince had gone out and wasn't in the room. He then asked her about Prince Kai, but the maid didn't seem able to communicate much and knew nothing. The rumor that he was a frightening person seemed to be true. The situation felt a bit dangerous since there was only an hour left until the appointed time, and they needed to find Prince Kai quickly. Rushing to look for him, Hein encountered the palace dog that had stolen a book. While chasing it, he saw someone lying on the ground. Thinking it was a crime scene inside the palace, it turned out to be Prince Kai asleep. Hein recalled that earlier the prince had told him to get lost. While he was thinking, Kai suddenly woke and lifted Hein up. Turns out he had mistaken Hein for the dog. Well, at least he considered Hein the new teacher, and it seemed he didn't need to be too cautious with him. From the way Kai spoke, Hein became a little suspicious of the information in those documents. Turning, Hein saw Kai glaring. It wasn't that Kai had deliberately aimed to be scary, but that his gaze had always been sharp. He had seemed frightening, but in reality he was very gentle. The Get Lost said that morning had actually meant he wanted help. Because he spoke softly, Hein had misread his mouth. While Kai was taking the test, a little girl came in. She was the youngest princess, named Adele. When Kai spoke about his sister, his expression softened. He confided in Hein that he cherished him, because among the tutors Hein was the first to speak to him, and that he would rely on Hein for his and his siblings' studies in the future. After handing in the test, he immediately fell asleep, a mature and gentle person completely different from the rumors. Instead of listening to such information, it would be more correct to feel it for oneself. Hein also received a new lesson useful for his royal tutoring work. In the Great Hall, Hein had finished grading 4 test papers, with 10 minutes left before the appointment time. He wondered if they would come. At this moment, Leonhard was sitting alone on a swing, thinking that if no one came, Hein would give up. Suddenly, Bruno ran past, saw him, and called him to go study together. Leonhard was surprised, since at first Bruno had opposed vehemently, yet now he respected the new tutor. However, having just broadened his horizons, Bruno had completely changed his attitude, becoming very respectful toward Hein. The more he heard, the more irritated Leonhard became, so he hurriedly ran away, leaving Bruno behind. With 3 minutes left until 4 o'clock, Bruno pushed the door open hastily and apologized for being late. It turned out he believed coming 10 minutes early to prepare was very necessary. Hein told him that coming at any time was fine, just not to call him master in front of the princes, otherwise it would be very embarrassing. The next to arrive was Prince Licht. He pushed the door open and called Hein's name in a familiar manner, which made Bruno irritated and jealous to the point of anger, while Hein found it normal since the prince's status was higher than his, so addressing him that way was not a problem. However, it should not be overly familiar. Just the matter of how to address the teacher was enough to make Bruno and Licht argue noisily. With 2 minutes left, Prince Kai arrived. The other two still ignored him and argued even more fiercely. It was only when Kai stepped in between them and glared once that both fell silent. Then he loudly said both were good boys, making the two take the initiative to apologize. It turned out he was the mediator among the brothers. He wanted everyone to be close to each other. Although his appearance seemed a little scary, inside he was extremely pure, making the younger brothers unable to refute. Finally, the clock struck 4, and only the fourth prince, Leonhard, had not come. Licht suggested that the group study without Leonhard, but since it was the first group lesson, no one should be missing, so they postponed it to another day. Bruno could not bear to waste it, so he hurriedly went to find him. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Leonhard hiding behind it. Leonhard said he came only to see Hane's failure when Kai and Licht did not come. But unexpectedly, those two were now completely close to Hane. The reasons were quite odd. Licht's female friends liked Hane, while Kai thought the new tutor was small, soft, and cute. Now that all four had arrived, Hane intended to begin the lesson. Seeing this, Leonhard tried to run away but was held back by Licht. The first thing Hane did was return the graded tests. First was Bruno with a perfect score, then Kai with 87 points, Licht with 60 points, and finally Leonhard with 1 point. This shocked everyone. Bruno could not believe it, so he borrowed the test to check. Maybe the answers were filled in the wrong places. No. Maybe he was tired. No. Maybe it was due to little time. No, they all had the same amount of time. In fact, Leonhard took the longest. He got only 1 point for writing his name correctly. This made Licht laugh endlessly, but even if Licht had not laughed, everyone was speechless at Leonhard. Fortunately, Kai was considerate enough to comfort him. Although his head was a little dull, at least his limbs were well developed. After much comforting, suddenly Hane said this score was terrifying, which made Leonhard angry and sulky, dashing away. At that speed, there was no stopping him. But the important matter now was why Leonhard hated studying so much. It turned out that from long ago, he hated not only studying but also teachers. Back then, his first tutor had been extremely strict. Because he could not learn as quickly as his brothers, that tutor focused on him, creating a terrible pressure that left a deep wound in Leonhard's heart. Therefore, he grew to hate teachers and saw them as enemies. After hearing this story, Hane realized he needed to act immediately to change him. He would prove he was not his enemy. Then Hane walked toward the window, without a word flung it open wide and jumped out even though this was the 3rd floor. The scene was very cool, but Bruno's shout of "Master" ruined the coolness. Meanwhile, Leonhard was thinking that only running away could make him feel at ease. Thinking about it, no tutor had ever managed to catch up with him. Just then, he heard someone calling "Prince" from behind. Turning around, he was scared stiff when he saw Hane standing there riding a horse. It turned out that because Hane's legs were too short to reach the stirrups, he had an embarrassing posture like that. Hane asked Leonhard if he could stop the horse so they could talk, but riding in such a way was terrifying. Who would dare stop? With no other choice, Hane jumped across, hugged Leonhard, and the two fell into a bush. One would think Leonhard had fainted in fear, but in fact he was just gaping in astonishment that someone riding a horse for the first time had actually caught up with him. At this moment, Hane finally had the time and chance to explain the earlier matter. In truth, he had not meant to criticize Leonhard, but only wanted to talk, to find a suitable method to teach each individual, and to tell him not to be discouraged because of today's test. Everyone has their own weakness, and only those who recognize their weakness can become stronger. Hearing those words, Leonhard gradually opened his heart and accepted this new tutor. But a more important issue now was how to get back. The road was quite far, and if they walked it might take several hours. Meanwhile, back at the royal palace, everyone was terribly worried because they could not find the tutor and the prince. Bruno, impatient, tried to go search by himself, but was stopped by the guards. Luckily, the two were found before dawn. Returning to the palace, Hane was led by a maid to the room provided for his rest, a room far too large for a commoner. The bed was also huge, making it hard for him to sleep, and as he tossed and turned he rolled right into the gap beside the bed. In the morning, the maid came to wake him, and was startled not to see him on the bed, but stuck in the gap the whole night. When Hane went to the great hall to begin teaching, he was surprised to see Leonhard already sitting there. It turned out Leonhard wanted to try to fulfill the promises of yesterday by studying. While he was working on his exercises, the other 3 princes arrived, and as usual Bruno and Licht were quarreling noisily. It seemed Haynes' upcoming tutoring job would be quite tough. Today, instead of studying at home, the whole group would have a practical experience by going to the capital to learn about the lives of commoners. Hearing about going downtown, Licht looked extremely excited. He just wanted to go out and play quickly. The city's situation was normal recently, so the trip would be safe. Hearing that, Kai and Bruno seemed reassured. But as always, trouble came from Leonhard. He refused to go downtown, asking why royalty needed to understand commoners' lives. So Haynes took action, telling him a historical story from 200 years ago about a princess who ignored the people's lives and lived in luxury, making the citizens so angry that they rose up and put her in the guillotine. There was even an illustration. Hearing that, Leonhard was terrified and agreed to go along, as long as he would not be put into a guillotine. After that, Haynes set an appointment with everyone in the courtyard at 10 o'clock. Since their identities needed to be hidden, he wanted everyone to dress so as not to be recognized. But after 10 o'clock, still no one had shown up. Just then, Licht appeared first. Being familiar with going downtown, the clothes he wore looked very fitting. After that, the other three came out. Fortunately, they were all dressed normally. Bruno thought they still needed to cover their faces. Luckily, Licht had the experience to warn them, otherwise all three would have gone with suspicious masks. After everyone was ready to leave, their grandmother came out crying and giving warnings as if they were going very far away. After traveling some distance, Haynes had the group stop at a random alley, and from there they would go on foot. Since it was their first time downtown, everyone still felt unfamiliar except for Licht. Bruno even brought a map to check directions. Now Haynes would begin assigning tasks for each person. He turned around and saw Licht whispering something to Kai. Then the whole group started strolling. Bruno clung tightly to the map, trying to memorize it and compare it with the scenery. Licht mocked him as an amateur, then volunteered to go first to lead the way. But the farther he walked, the more bewildered he became. It turned out that every time Licht went downtown, it was always his girlfriends who led and guided him, so now he had no idea where he was going. Moreover, this place was quite crowded. It was the Ring Road, the main street of the capital, and both the theater and the city hall were located right here. Thanks to such facilities, the city had a population of about 1,300,000. Therefore, they must not separate, especially Leonhard. It seemed Haynes' story had really frightened him, so Haynes held his hand to prove that as long as they did not reveal their identity, they would be safe. But while he was leading Leonhard, he saw Licht whispering something to Bruno, and when they arrived at the shopping district, Haynes suggested everyone split up to shop. Kai and Bruno quickly separated to the places they wanted, while Leonhard awkwardly admitted he had never shopped before. Seeing that, the two of them took him to a department store. Licht whispered something again in front of Haynes. Then, entering the store, Leonhard looked around and chose something he liked. His taste was truly terrible. He picked an ugly doll and even praised it as cute, completely incomprehensible. When it came time to pay, upon hearing the price of 55 cents, the boy, not knowing the denominations of money, just handed everything over. So Haynes had to give a lesson right there. Luckily, Leonhard was royalty, or else he would have starved long ago. And fortunately, the staff they encountered were kind, otherwise there would have been nothing left. After that, Licht said he had some personal business and dragged Leonhard away. It seemed the princes were plotting something. Bruno was still absorbed in the bookstore, as if he wanted to buy the entire shop. Haynes reminded him to choose just one book he really needed. Luckily, they met a kind shopkeeper who marked the books Bruno had chosen so he could buy them next time he came. Then the two went to meet Prince Kai. He said to go to the square, and upon arriving they were surprised to see many pigeons perched all over him. It turned out the boy had spent all his money buying food for the birds. Then Kai asked Haynes if he wanted to feed them. As soon as Haynes threw out food, the pigeons swarmed to eat, and then they even tried to lift him away. Luckily, Kai pulled him back, otherwise they would have lost a tutor. Suddenly, Licht called them over and pointed at a sausage stand, saying he wanted to eat. The group felt awkward not knowing how to eat it, so Haynes demonstrated how commoners ate. Even with guidance, Bruno and Leonhard still looked stiff, while Kai and Licht ate heartily. As evening approached and they were preparing to return to the palace, an unexpected event occurred. A lazy thief snatched an old woman's bag and pushed her down. That made the princes angry. Yet the old woman only worried that her beloved grandchild was unharmed. Seeing the grandmother's concern for her grandchild reminded them of their grandmother, the queen, which awakened a sense of justice in Leonhard. He intended to use his speed to chase the thief and make him pay, but Kai held him back. While everyone was still worried about the old woman, Kai had already chased down the thief and retrieved the bag. That made Leonhard feel embarrassed. Very quickly, the thief was arrested by the police and taken away. The old woman came to thank Kai with a bag of candy for helping her recover the purse. Leonhard also received a bag from her, though he shyly said he had not helped at all. His brave act of standing up for a stranger was very praiseworthy. On the way back, Hein asked what they had learned, but all the answers were ordinary, showing they had not grasped the true lesson. What they should have seen was the smiles of the people here. Although bad people existed, in a society of 1,300,000, there were 1,300,000 ways of life and personalities, and King Victor, their father, had worked so hard to preserve those smiles. If they became king in the future, they too must strive like him. Hein then noticed a strange bag beside them and asked what it was, but the group hid it and refused to say, as if they still had not completely accepted him. That evening, as Hein went for a walk to clear his mind, Leonhard suddenly carried him off somewhere. Knowing for sure they were about to play some trick, Hein poked his head in and said that whatever it was, he would not be surprised. But he really was surprised. The princes had prepared a welcome party for him, with the gifts they had bought that day. That night, Hein slept very well together with the presents he had been given. One night, while Hein was preparing lessons for the next day's class, he suddenly heard a loud commotion outside. A moment later, someone knocked on the door, saying that His Majesty, after being absent for half a year and now returning, very much wished to meet Hein and the princes. Early the next morning, Hein was escorted to the king's place. For some reason, he felt restless and anxious, and this uneasy feeling was shared not only by Hein but also by the princes. Although the princes all deeply respected their father, they also felt immense pressure. Only Kai was excited to meet the king, for his heart was as vast as the cosmos, the galaxy itself, so it was no surprise that their relationship was unlike an ordinary father and son. After the formal and ceremonial royal greetings, the king unexpectedly burst into tears. It turned out that the princes felt awkward because their father was so warm and emotional, which made them not really want to meet him much. So the god of war in legend was just like an ordinary father after all. Seeing his sons in harmony with their new tutor made him very happy. But the father mode was over, and now he would speak to them as the king. After reviewing the reports and test results of his children, he pointed out each one's shortcomings. The one who troubled him most was Leonhard. Yet Leonhard himself had forgotten what it was that troubled his father. It was that test with a score of 1 point. If things continued like this, his ascension to the throne would only be a pipe dream. Therefore, the king demanded that Leonhard retake the test and score at least 60 points, otherwise he would lose the right to inherit the throne. Normally, everyone was equal, but this was a special case, so he entrusted Hein to personally tutor Leonhard for 3 days, after which he would be retested. This shocked Leonhard greatly. He was not too concerned about becoming king, but what crushed him was that he had disappointed his father. Yet most of the blame lay with him, for he had driven away all the tutors before. But now things were different. He had a special genius tutor, not to mention his supportive brothers, all ready to help him improve. So everyone got to work immediately. The first step was to determine his level. Surely, he must at least know what 1 + 1 was, right? But in reality, he did not even know the most basic of basic calculations. This left everyone completely stunned, as if there were no hope. They told him to think again, and he answered 11. The more Leonhard spoke, the more speechless everyone became. They told him to use his fingers to count, and thanks to that, he finally realized the answer was 2. But when trying a slightly larger sum, he froze again, not knowing to use the other hand. Kai then came up with a clever idea. Combine something Leonhard hated with something he liked, specifically having him study while running. This sounded more like a punishment. Then they tried asking someone Leonhard admired to teach him that person was Bruno. But as he listened to his older brother's lecture, his eyes sparkled and glued themselves to him, while his ears let not a single word in. This was hopeless. Out of options, they resorted to cheating, giving Leonhard the exact same test as before, so he only needed to memorize the answers. But did Licht really believe his brother could memorize all 50 answers in order? In the end, it still came down to Hein. He combined food with math problems, and Leonhard could solve them smoothly. Thus, they had found a way for him to study, though it was still extremely difficult. Time passed quickly, and Leonhard's ability reached only 15 points, still far from the required 60. Could he possibly turn things around when the test was tomorrow? Leonhard wanted to give up, but thinking positively, if he had managed 15 points this time, then he had discovered 85 mistakes, and next time he could do better. These words strongly moved Leonhard, giving him renewed spirit. That was good, but it was time to sleep. Studying should not harm one's health. The next morning, before the exam, he was still studying, trying to seize every moment. At last, the test time arrived. Leonhard was ready to face it alone. His 3 brothers silently cheered him on, and even Hein, deep in his heart, encouraged him. After the test time ended, Hein graded the paper immediately. The result was truly surprising. Leonhard had scored 59 points. Everyone was overjoyed and congratulated him, but they forgot that the requirement was 60. So, to keep the promise, he still lost his right to inherit the throne. However, something special always happens at the last moment. Hein had misgraded one spot.